Hey,
Can
all,
y'all
and
hear
welcome
me all right?
to. Oh, sorry.
I just want
Oh,
to make sure you can still hear me with my
oh
headphones.
yeah, yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining this Gain career in the Careers and Communications panel as part of Powering Blue in 2022. We are joined by Amani Zara, John Noonan, and Ianthi Metzger. My name is Roderica Applewhite. I probably have the least amount of comms experience in this panel. I'm currently the Senior Communications Advisor for Michigan Democratic Party, focusing on Governor Whitmer's 2022 reelect. It is actually my first comms job. I was a researcher before this. My previous political job, I was on the rapid response team as the researcher for Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign. Before that, I had a stint at Emily's List where I actually met Ianthi, and I was working on the research team there, and then also was a research director on a couple statewides, and got my start as an opposition researcher at a firm here in DC. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. So if everyone could just do a brief bio on how they got to arrive to this panel today. We'll just start with you, John.
Well, hi, and it's nice to meet you all, and I'm really happy to be here. How I got my start in communications, easiest way anybody did, and that was to ask. I started off doing what so many people do here in campaign world, and doing field. But I knew I wanted to do comms, and this is no knock on field. I also knew that I didn't want to knock on doors a lot and to launch campuses. So I looked as quickly as possible for the comms people, and started talking to them and made friends and said, hey, how do I do this? And then looked for kind of a low-level comms job at a small firm in Minnesota, and was able to become basically the co in a firm called McFarland & Co. It was a very small firm, so anybody would have been co. And from there, I moved on to take a variety of positions at AFSCME. So I've done work in the political department. I've done work in the federal government affairs department. It had a different title then, and then came kind of back home to my specialized skill set, which is comms. And I've been here basically for like 13 years or so now in those varieties of roles, and working on campaigns across the states.
Cool. Thanks, John. Ianthi, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks. So I got my start in comms mostly because I really enjoyed workers' rights and unions. So I actually worked at AFL-CIO as my first job. And it was more that I had met somebody who I was like a senior in college, and I'd met somebody. I was doing like an alternative spring break trip on workers' rights, and I met a former student who was like, "Oh, I have a media fellowship at AFL-CIO. Like, it's pretty great. Like, you get to do workers' rights, and I hadn't really contemplated doing communications before, but I did the fellowship. It was like a year-long thing. It was in 2012, so I got to like go to Connecticut and work on the Senate race there a little bit. But yeah, it was my first start in comms, and I realized I really liked it. And then when the fellowship ended, I went into the Human Rights Campaign in like early 2014, and so that was a time when marriage equality was like really like a lot of states were like striking down bans. So it was like a really exciting time to work in that space, and I really like learned so much that I was there for like about 3 years or so, until I maybe like a little shorter than that, but until I realized that I wasn't getting promoted and I wanted to move on a little bit. And I also started grad school for communications, and I met a lot of people who were working at PR firms. I thought that might be like a different type of experience as well, to like just really like drill down on comms and like be in that environment with others who like only know comms. So went to a PR firm. I was actually only there for like 11 months because Trump got elected, and I realized that my clients weren't political enough, and I felt like I wasn't like contributing enough to like the fight against Trump. And so I went back to HRC actually because my boss there like said they had an opening. It was around 2018 midterm time, and she thought that would be a good fit for a press secretary role there. So I did that for the 2018 midterms and had a great time. And then went to Emily's List because I wanted to work with candidates more directly. I really liked what I did at HRC, but I wanted to work with like actual candidates more. And so I was at Emily's List for a couple of years. I also did a stint at Collective PAC, which is Emily's List, but for candidates who are Black. So for those who don't know, Emily's List is for pro-choice Democratic women. It's helping elect them. And then Collective PAC is for electing Black candidates. And I was there for a pretty short amount of time because a friend at Planned Parenthood reached out to me and said they had an opening for Director of State Media Campaigns, and I knew I had to take that job. So that's where I am now. I've been at Planned Parenthood for about 8 months or so. And it's a really crazy time to be doing repro. But yeah, that's sort of my story.
Awesome. Thanks, Yante. Amani, we'll kick it to you.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me, and I'm super excited to be speaking with a bunch of fantastic people on this panel. But yeah, my name is Amani Zara, and I always find that I kind of stumbled not only into comms, but also politics itself. I actually got my bachelor's in psychology and with a pre-med focus, so I was pretty convinced I was going to be a psychiatrist for a very long time, but I always had some level of passion for communications, and so I was getting my minor in that just to appease my course load a little bit. And as a part of that, I did an internship at the Chicago mayor's press office, and that kind of really opened everything up for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I really like comms, and I'm not going to do pre-med. But from there, it was my senior year, and I did that internship, and then I did another one at the Chicago Department of Public Health in their comms and press office. And upon graduation, I accepted a job as the communications specialist at the Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago. I'm in Chicago, so it was fun being on that campus. And I loved it. I absolutely adored it. I was dabbled in a lot of things. So, with smaller organizations, you tend to be comms experts in a lot of things. And that's kind of been my experience thus far. But I was doing digital. I was working with David Axelrod on his podcast, The Axe Files, as well as our speaker series and managing press and such there. And working with all of those fantastic students, I realized, I want to kind of get into campaign world, but I don't know if I want to make the jump into communications because I want to understand a campaign, and I've never, worked on one. And so I joined Pete Buttigieg's campaign as an organizer, and I organized in Iowa and California, and that gave me a world of experience. It's not a linear path by any means, but I really enjoyed the organizing experience, and it's helped me so much even in my current positions to be able to speak to the work. But after the campaign ended, I worked as a communication strategist at Higher Ground Labs, which is a progressive incubator. And that was a really great experience. Definitely a different world to politics, obviously more on the tech side, but still that comms work. And I am currently at the National Democratic Training Committee as their Associate Director of Marketing. So again, those communications positions that aren't so clearly aligned with specific responsibilities, but definitely very fun and very enjoyable. Yeah.
Awesome. So for those watching, we are going to walk through a couple of pre-selected questions, and then we'll open it up. So if folks want to just throw their questions in the chat, I'll read off of them once we get through the ones we've got started. So I know everyone kind of touched a little bit on what they're doing now, but it'd be really helpful to know what an average day looks like for you, especially since we've got a pretty good cross-cut of different organizations and different kind of comms needs and levels. So John, if you want to go ahead and go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I realize I forgot to say what my current position is. So I helped run the field and campaign communications unit at AFSCME. And what that is it's a team of communicators who work across our campaigns and our priority campaigns, assisting affiliates on campaigns in the states, sometimes leading their own. Our day always starts with the 10 a.m., not with that team, but with our greater management team at the International Union Communications Department. And I think all of our intros really showed how diverse comms jobs really are. So, we run through what's going on in every department. So that's editorial, it's digital, it's video, it is marketing. Let's see, what else do we have? There's the field and campaigns communications, which I help to run. So that means, a report on everything important going on in the States. It's executive communications because I work at an organization that has democratic leadership and an elected president. So there are people who focus on our elected top level leaders. So it starts with that. of course, email before, and then some email afterwards, following up on any immediate needs. And then usually either focusing on a particular project that needs to get done for the day, working with our team on what they are doing and what their priorities are. So it's oftentimes reviewing campaign plans, check-ins on how the campaigns are going, helping to clear any like political hurdles that they may be facing in their day-to-day, and then trying to find time to focus on like any incoming from our affiliates at that same time, and hopefully squeeze in any projects that I need to move forward myself.
Awesome. Amani, do you want to walk through what average day looks like for you?
Sure. Yeah. So, kind of speaking to what I said earlier about there are particular comms positions that really are and as John even just explained, sort of all encapsulating. And as the associate director of marketing, my day is really focused around multiple different segmented departments that maybe on campaigns may look differently. But within the National Democratic Training Committee, our marketing department houses our communications team, our press team, our data team, our digital/social team. And so my job is really to align on larger strategy for all of these different fantastic groups that we house within our marketing department. And so, it's really focused on larger strategy and how we can roll that out effectively in all of those avenues. So I try to look forward into, the year and start planning on, okay, like this is what we're doing. What does press look like for these next couple of months? How are we folding that into our digital and platforms plan? What are we doing with our email program to echo that? What type of events are we having? The National Democratic Training Committee, we run a lot of what we call virtual live trainings. And so those are free trainings for any Democrat on a variety of numerous issues that you can kind of get experience in and take from them what you want. But they definitely are in line with the way that election cycles are in, how they're running, right? So our November plan was very much around, okay, this is election time. But looking ahead now, it's like, okay, filing deadlines are coming up. So how are we speaking to that? What candidates are we uplifting? How are we getting our messaging out? What state departments are we working with? And then, down the line come August, that's GOTV. So yeah, I would just say, just to reiterate, it is a lot of implementing strategy across all of these different avenues and trying to ensure that we're reaching everybody where they are.
Awesome. And Yante, I wanted to go to you last because I'm sure that these days things are particularly busy / awful for you. I mean, obviously we had the Mississippi abortion case that was heard before the Supreme Court earlier this month, and the Texas abortion ban as well. So what is the day looking like for you, and how do you also balance the difference between kind of rapid response actions and then also kind of laying out what the comms plan is going to look like for you over the next 6 months?
Yeah, it's been like a really difficult 8 months. I mean, it's funny because I started in May, and then the week after the Texas law got signed, and then I think that same week they agreed to take up the Mississippi case at the Supreme Court. So definitely did not expect to be working here at a time when like Roe v. Wade was probably going to be overturned. So it's been interesting. But I mean, a typical day. So, I mean, a lot of meetings. Planned Parenthood is like a really, really huge organization. So there's a lot of meetings and a lot of people to like read into things that you're working on. But I typically start the day with like a 9:15 call with like my team. I do state media. I'm the director of state media. So I have like 3 direct reports, and we just sort of check in on like what's going on. A lot of it is like Texas related right now. But we do have other states. Like the press officers on my team divide the country into 3 basically, and they work with all our affiliates on various issues, but they're usually related to legislation and on bad bills that have passed. So we sort of check in on like other things that are happening. Like in Ohio recently, there were a couple bad bills that were passed. So it's really like checking in on like, okay, what is the strategy? What does the affiliate need from us? Do they need like a comms plan, help writing an op-ed, just sort of figuring out like what we want to do to help them like stop a bill, slow it down. Usually these days it's hard to stop anything given, the makeup of where we are right now. But so it's a lot of that. It's a lot of planning ahead just because the state legislative sessions are starting in January. And so I'm sort of like coming up with like a comms plan for how we want to show up in the new year, especially because we are at a point where, access is going to probably, be overturned with Roe. So just really like thinking through like how do we want to like talk about that in the new year? What do we want to be pushing for? What do we want to be saying? And then we also are going to be doing a training with all our affiliate comm staffers. So I'm like working on like a training deck for them where we're going to talk about legislative planning and media planning in the new year and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of like just ongoing things. And then of course it is like a really busy time in general. And I mean, we get a ton of inquiries, like our media inbox is always, there's just always reporters reaching out. So it's a lot of it is also figuring out, okay, what does this reporter need? Like who in my team is going to take this request? And it's prepping our spokespeople. Like if they need to do an interview, like making sure they have what they need, writing briefs for them in advance so that they feel prepared to go on TV or talk to a reporter. So making sure that's all happening. And then, yeah, it is like really hard to sort of manage the rapid response and the planning ahead, but in some ways those things are connected. I mean, with Texas yesterday, we heard from the Supreme Court on that case, and the actual arguments were heard on November 1st. So we've been planning for like a month, more than a month, about what we were going to say and how we were going to show up. So that entire month ahead was just like us writing different versions of press releases, talking points, prepping folks, making sure that we had spokespeople lined up, whether it was our doctors, our Texas affiliate CEOs, our spokespeople at national. So it was a lot of like prepping folks in advance for that moment so that when it did happen on Friday morning at 10 a.m., we were ready to go. Once we got our lawyers green light, of course. So it's a lot of like planning ahead so that you're ready for that rapid response moment and having all of the different systems in place in advance so that you're not like caught completely out of the blue. I mean, that does happen sometimes, but just sort of like knowing like who in your team is handling what and knowing that we always go to like our lawyers or our policy folks first so that they can tell us how we're showing up and what, the law actually says or what the like litigation opinion or whatever says. So just working with them really closely is a big part of our job as well on state media. But yeah, it's definitely a lot happening all the time. But we have a really big team. So I'm very lucky to have a lot of people working in this space with us.
Awesome. Thanks. And anyone can jump in on this one, but just what's the most surprising thing about your role?
I'd say it's the diversity of skill set that you end up gaining and all the different places that people end up in communications from. We're going to keep going back to this, I'm sure. And I think in the questions to come, I'm just going to keep talking about it too. But there's no one way to get into this. And it's such a specialized field that there are so many different paths to get here.
Yeah, I would actually echo, a similar sentiment to that. I think oftentimes too, you can find yourself in really fantastic and stimulating organizing or communications or marketing positions. I mean, wherever you're at in politics, and you're starting at organizations that are still growing, right? And so NDTC kind of speaks to that. It was founded about like 5 years ago. We're still almost like early stage. And so the opportunity to expand and really build out your team is one of the things that I found surprisingly fun. And I really, really enjoy being able to look long term and take all of the experiences that I've had in former positions, but also the experiences of like some of my badass friends who are also working in really great positions in the field, and using that to build out a team that is representative, that acknowledges modern and newer changes in the comms and like marketing fields, that is growing in a scalable way, and also ensuring that you are really following up on your mission and you are really expanding your service or your campaign or whatever, wherever you're at, to people, and again, like meeting them where they're at. And so I just have really, really found it enjoyable and surprisingly fun again to be able to really build out a like dream team, right? And I think that happens more often than you would think coming into positions in politics and public service.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said this, but I mean, I definitely did not expect to be working at Planned Parenthood at a time when, like, the right to abortion access was so under attack. I think that, I mean, it always has been for the past decade or so, but like to know that like the fundamental constitutional right might be overturned was definitely like something that I did not expect to take when I took this position. And I think too, because I've never worked at a direct service organization, I've worked at advocacy orgs. I mean, Planned Parenthood, they kind of do everything. Like they are an advocacy org, but they're also like a litigating organization, and they also are a healthcare provider. And so like making sure that we're putting our patients first, and everything that we put out there is about patient reassurance and like making sure that like our folks know that where they can go to get care and that we're going to be there for them. That is something that I had never really done as a communicator before, and that has been, whereas that's like what we do. Like we try to lead with that patient voice and that healthcare provider voice, and so that has been not surprising, but something that I just definitely didn't like expect as part of my job when I first took it. But I would also just sort of echo what others said about, just all the different things that you get to learn. And, I try to joke that I feel like I'm a lawyer sometimes now, because I'm just like trying to like, decipher opinions that, judges say, and I'm not a lawyer, but when I get one thing right, I'm really excited that the lawyers agree with me on something. So yeah, just like, learning different skill sets and working with different teams, and just the breadth of the communication space has been really interesting at an org that's this big.
Yeah, on the skill sets, obviously communicating is the job. So part of that is talking to reporters. And this is mainly a question for me too, but there's also a question in the chat here from William on how you begin building relationships with the media. Obviously, Ianthe, you're at Planned Parenthood, so you're working with decades of reporter contacts and people reaching out to you proactively rather than and correct me if I'm wrong, but rather than having to go out and kind of introduce Planned Parenthood to reporters and publications. So how do you start building those relationships? And this is a question for everyone, because especially for me, since this is my first comms job, it feels like everyone either is where I am, which is ground zero, and I'm just now kind of making inways with Michigan, with the Michigan Press Corps, and then also you have someone that's like, oh yeah, every reporter that's ever worked, yeah, I have them on my phone. So how do you kind of get from step A to Z there?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like building any relationship in some ways. It's like, reaching out, and like if there's a reporter that covers the beat that you're on or something, like it's reaching out to them, like saying like, hey, I'm and I work in this space. I think that, we have a lot that we can connect on or talk about, and just like sort of like opening that door. And you may hear back, you may not, but like just being consistent and, following up with like, if they read an article that you feel like is really relevant, like making that clear. It's also just like, it's really just consistency and reaching out to people. And then you will get to a point when like they know your name and and when they see you in their inbox, that they like know to like reach out. So, I mean, that's like sort of how it starts, but I'm happy to like pass it to others.
Amani, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think beyond like I acclaimed myself as a bachelor's in psychology person very early on, but I really do think a lot of it is like that consistency and that proximity to people. Like the more often you're in the inbox, the more often that you're connecting is definitely fantastic. But I think one thing that also is important to keep in mind is like, you always want to be prepared with a really quality pitch, like especially if people aren't coming to you and you're seeking, story, or you're seeking press out. And like, sometimes some of the, rudimentary mistakes is sort of reaching out with like a not so fleshed out, compelling piece. Like it's almost like you want to do almost nearly all the work for the contact. Like you don't want someone to have to dig things or information from you. And so the more prepared you can come with a compelling pitch that mirrors, the publication's sort of, talking points and position points and the themes that they're really tackling, the better, right? Because there's nothing worse than like having like a multiple email exchange, hashing out minor details that perhaps could have been included earlier, or running back statistics that may have changed, or whatever the case. Like the longer the email exchange, personally for me, like the more my soul kind of crushes. And so I would love to, like, if you can front load that work, then I think that's really important. And so I think really just focusing on creating the most compelling detail filled pitch possible that matches obviously what is happening in specifically with that publication and or whoever the contact is and what they're writing about, the better.
Yeah, you're dragging me a little bit. I hate talking on the phone, but John, what about you?
Oh, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. That was incredibly comprehensive. So yeah, just reach out, ask, see if people want to get coffee.
Yeah, and we have a follow-up from Veronica, which I think is a really good question. She's basically just asking, and this is more a question for you, John and Ianthe. since you have huge opponents to obviously labor and opponents to reproductive rights. So the question is basically, is it more effective to have outside kind of affiliate groups help you out with that, or when you're kind of doing pushback on some of the opponents that you just have to your organization's missions, is it helpful for that to come in-house?
I think it is imperative that you have, outside validators who are on your side and as large of a community pushing on your issue as possible. Like Yante mentioned, and honestly, it was way smarter than what I had to say. Progressives and the institutional left, for lack of a better way of putting it, are in a place of existential threat right now. It's not a place of we are kind of fighting at the margins. Public sector employee unions where I work had a case called Janus that versus AFSCME Council 31, which is one of our affiliates, that really sought to stamp us out completely, and we're glad it didn't because we have a strong organizing structure. As they said, they're going after Roe right now, so you need everybody, and you need discipline, and you need as much as we can, and everybody be prepared to get their shoes on for this issue really soon here, because excuse my language, was like really fucked up what's happening right now, and it's so real.
Yeah, it is really fucked up. That is true. I would also just add, yes, I think that everything John said is true, and having as many people, as many third-party validators as possible is really important. I think thinking about who your audience is, like what are you trying to say, and who you're saying it to, because that's going to really determine like who the best messenger is for what you're trying to say. We try to like let our affiliates lead with things that are happening in their state. We want them. Our affiliates are basically their own nonprofits, and they are like our bosses at national. So like we sort of let them lead, and then we try to figure out a strategy with them for how we can like be helpful. But we, with a local issue, we want like the local folks leading on it. But obviously like we're like at a national crisis point. But yeah, it's definitely really important to like figure out who your validators are, what they're gonna say, who they're gonna say it to, and like what that message. The message overall might be the same, but like it might be a little bit tailored depending on the audience. So thinking about all those things is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. And being that this is a career and communications panel, and we have a lot of people that are interested in breaking in, that are watching right now, what are skills, and I assume everyone here has hired staff at some point. So what are skills that you're looking for? Things that might not necessarily be directly commsy, like working at your college newspaper or something like that, but skills that are transferable.
I can go first if you're waiting. I look for people who are well-rounded. Most of the positions I hire for, almost all of them, are based in the field and are expected to have some knowledge of every piece of a campaign. So, like we talked about earlier, we have units in our department for pretty much everything from media to editorial, which is the writers and blog, to video production. Although that's less important because we have a team to help out with that. But as many of those skills as you can bring, the better, and especially in a world that is digital first at this point, any data skills that somebody can bring and highlight really helps. One thing I will say too, though, you need to have a sharp and well-written cover letter, and typos are an absolute no, and that's kind of like straight up.
Amani, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So, I didn't go from research into comms like Isabel, you put in the chat, and Radhika, like how you've spoken, you have as well. But I did, skip around from like digital comms to organizing, and then back into a more traditional comms role. And so, from a personal experience, I think that one of the things I really stress the most is like in any position that you have, there are a lot of comms parallels there already. Right? Like it doesn't, like from research to organizing to digital, if comms is your end goal, there are so many tasks within those specific roles that you can really highlight that are fantastic qualities to have in communications, whether it be like your agility in the last year to move your message digital, like from in person to digital, whether it be media monitoring to having a really good hold of news and press and what's going on in the news cycle, to a lot of like larger skills. Like when I hire, I transparently, I love people coming in who aren't really traditionally in politics or public service, or perhaps not even in communications, because I think that the insight that they bring and the value that they bring to the team is incredible. It's fresh eyes, it's like fresh spirit, and it's incredible to be able to work with people who have experience in different industries and in different positions. Because the one thing about communications at its core, right, is that it's vital that you are able to communicate with people from different backgrounds, people in different industries, people in different positions, professions. And if you are coming in from a different profession, then you are able to really, really help your comms team or yourself in that role be able to speak to more people. I mean, like I said, at its core, it's about reaching as many people as you can. And so I think it's a strength oftentimes when you are coming in from a different industry or you're jumping into a different field entirely. And you can really play to that in a couple of the things that I referenced previously about how there is a lot of crossover in different positions as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ianthe, I wanted to ask you, especially since you're given your specific role, how do you kind of juggle between deciding to pitch something locally versus nationally, since especially now since Planned Parenthood is getting so much attention, but specifically in Texas and Mississippi, how do you kind of decide if it makes more sense to go to Texas and Mississippi outlets versus going to like MSNBC or Washington Post or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's not really like one specific way. I mean, I can give like a brief example. Like one of our Texas providers, he is he's got license in Louisiana, so he's going to be providing there as well, because given the state of things in Texas. And then a reporter had reached out because they like learned this and wanted to like follow him and like write his story about like why he's like expanding and all of that. But it was a reporter from like a really small outlet. We just didn't feel like was the best person to tell this story given like where we were. And so like in that situation, we sort of knew that we wanted like a national outlet, like a NBC or like a CNN or somebody to like shadow him for that. So like it kind of like depends a little bit. And then we had like another example where in Colorado, our Rocky Mountains affiliate was going to be opening a new health center near the Texas border. And for that, we were like, that might be like more of a local story because it kind of like depended more on like, it was more about like what the health center was going to be doing and all these like very specific things. And so like we really wanted it to be like a national thing, but then eventually we realized that this is more of like a local piece, more like a community need type thing versus like us like sort of like taking advantage of like this one opportunity to be like, hey, look, like this affiliate is doing this thing. And that's not to say that we're not going to like mention it to like national reporters, but like we definitely felt like we wanted it to seem like more like of an organic story than it wasn't just like PPFA national, like, capitalizing on like this one thing. So there are like a lot of different things to balance. And there's not like really like a one way type to do it. But those are just a couple of examples that we recently had to like deal with a national versus like local angle for something.
Awesome. Yeah, John, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I was just trying to get hair out of my eyes.
All good. So there's another question from Veronica, especially, and honestly for me too, since we're about to be on the on year for 2022 cycle. Is there anything that you feel like the Democratic Party should be doing more as far as messaging, so that we can kind of hang on to the gains that we have federally next year and with statewide like governor's races? For anybody.
One thing I think is critical is like alignment on messaging. I think that, this could be controversial or, whatever, but I think that, and even speaking to Ianthe's work and around, with Planned Parenthood and how so many of our rights are just like on the line right now. And there's, okay, here, anecdotally, the National Democratic Training Committee, the organization that I work at, the candidates that used our resources, the majority of them are running for school board elections. And when we spoke to them about what are the issues that you're really, talking about this year, by far and wide, mask mandates and critical race theory, right? Like that is what they're running on, that is what they're running for, that's what their messaging is around. And I think the better that Democrats as a whole can align on the way that we are messaging around these points in ways that are actually focused on more like local influence and how this impacts people on the daily, how people are like really being affected in their communities and how that change can happen, I think the better. Because I really am a strong believer in top-down messaging. It doesn't work. It has to be bottom-up. And so I think that if we can align on that, the earlier the better. But that is just my 2 cents.
John, do you want to go ahead?
I think it's critically important that we're telling people how we're making their lives better. Very specifically, we are spending a lot of time talking about the BIF. We're spending a lot of time talking about Build Back Better. We're not talking about what's in it very much. At AFSCME, what we lean into very, very heavily is like the difference it makes to be part of a union, the concrete things that are better for your community and that are better for your family when you choose to be a member of a union. And like, if we're not showing people like how we're making their lives better, we're just talking about superfluous things and allowing people to define us and tell voters what we are about. And really, we're getting away from our values.
Yeah, I mean, I would +1 to everything that John and Imani said. I think another thing is, this is like separate from messaging, but like the candidates that we're putting up, I just feel like we need to be bolder and stop like picking these safe people who, I mean, we just saw it in Virginia, like they picked the quote unquote safe nominee in Terry McAuliffe, the like white man who had been governor before, and he like lost by a lot. When there were like so many interesting people of color running in the primary who didn't even have a shot. And I just feel like as a party, we need to be bolder and stop like, just stop thinking that we need to like assuage, the like moderate voter or whatever. Like, I think that there are a lot of people like who are very progressive, who, believe in the things that we believe, who just like aren't motivated to vote because the people that we're putting up do not share their values or do not outwardly speak to them. And I think we just need to be bolder and stop like, I just feel like Democrats are just so scared sometimes, and it's just really frustrating. Because I mean, I'm one person, and we are who we can't change it by ourselves, but it's just like, I just wish that we could just generally with our messaging, with our candidates, just be like a lot more aggressive, because the Republicans are not afraid to be aggressive. So
no, that's totally right, because the messenger is the message, and who is who's presenting it. It really has a lot to do with who's receiving it and who's going to take it in. We do have to be bolder.
Yeah, I appreciate those answers. That was really great. And so I guess with that, what goes into making a comms plan? How much of it is kind of moving with a narrative that's kind of organically building itself? And how much of it is kind of trying to get one started? And this is especially helpful for me as someone, my primary job is building narratives. So would love everyone's thoughts on that.
I would say to start, I mean, yeah, I used to have to build a lot of comms plans for candidates at Emily's List, and like I would like go by like a quarter, like, okay, what do you want to accomplish for like the next 4 months, and like think through like dates that are dates on the calendar that exist already, like tax day, like any date that is just like kind of an obvious like organic like earned media hook, like go with that, and then think about like, okay, what do you want to do like for yourself, like what are you trying to do, like do you want to like release a new economic policy plan, like what do you want to do over the next 4 months, and then think through like when is the most strategic time to like do that thing, and then think through like how do you want to do that thing, like so you think through what the thing is, how you want to release it, and then like what are the tactics, like is it like through a press release, is it through like a town hall, is it through an op-ed, like what is the best way for you to get that out there once you figure out what the timing that makes the most sense, is sort of like the way that I would look at it, and then like you sort of map it out based on that 4-month calendar that you're putting together. And then you, of course, have to, be nimble because things are going to pop up and you have to like figure out like, okay, what are the, like, as a candidate, for example, like what are the like 3 main issues that you want to focus on? And so like when you see that issue in the news, that you have to like speak out about it. You have to like do X, Y, Z on it. So just like having all that stuff prepared in advance, so that when there is a rapid response moment, that this is like a time that you're going to be showing up is really important. Because yeah, you can't predict things, but you can like in advance plan for when you do want to say something, when it's an issue that is important to you. So those are the things that I would say to start.
Cool. Imani?
Yeah, I mean, like a massive retweet to the quarterly review. I think those are vital. And it does also, like, out there just explained, it gives you a really great time to be able to put time and effort into rapid response. I mean, like the earlier you can plan, the better. I would say, there is a tendency, I think, for everyone in communications, or I'm gonna take 2 steps back from that. Perhaps it's just my own tendency to really want to really have like the catchiest, stingiest story that everyone is talking about, that everyone wants to do. Like, I have found in my short career, like that doesn't work. And sometimes it does. Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes it does, and you publish a fantastic piece, and like your message is really, it aligns with it. It goes perfectly well. But I think that I have found more success instead, really, really creating these comms plans, truly centered and around storytelling, and telling the stories of our candidates, telling the stories of our trainers, of our learners, and going local with them, or trying to take those stories and use it to craft a message that can apply to a more national lens. But I'm obsessed with storytelling, and as much as I can, I try to make that like the driving force in any of the comms plans that I'm really creating, because those are the things, in my opinion, that matter, and that have massive value, that shift people, that cause change, that drive home values, and also, you can't write that. Like, you can't. You can pull statistics, you can do whatever. There are, but even the organization I work at, storytelling is important because that is what we do. In campaigns, it can be very similar. There are organizations that may not be like the perfect strategy for, but I do believe that as much as you can, if you can tell the stories of the people that you're influencing, or the people that are working with you or alongside you, the better. And it makes for very compelling communications.
Yeah. Don, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different ways to do it, and it really depends on, kind of where you're sitting in the chair, like the chair you're sitting in. So, from like the national perspective, for like our whole organization, we're really, really narrative driven and brand driven, because, everything has to, fit in there and flow from there, and, we can work out the details on the rest. But, for like my team, the field people, they're really always hyper goal focused. So I think if you spend time working backwards from your goal, it allows you to arrive at, all of those key moments that you have to, because then you can define who can actually give you the goal. So you have your targets. Then you can focus in on what moves those people, so you can develop your message. And then all of that works back to, developing your message and your arc. And then you can key in on those key dates. You can key in on those tactics and choose which works best for which audience. Because there's always going to be multiple audiences. There's always going to be sub goals, and there's always going to be even like sub campaigns within a campaign as well. And you constantly have to be repeating this thing, like they're talking about, quarterly or more often, even daily, depending on the speed of your campaign.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have a question from Jono, who's asking if you could highlight the differences and areas of overlap between paid media and communications jobs. And so really just the difference between paid media and earned media, and one more is more valuable to pursue as a comm strategy than the other. Yante, do you want to go?
Sure. So yeah, I only do earned media, and earned media. So paid media is like when you're like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I'm not a paid media expert. So anybody else, feel free to jump in. It's more like, like ads, and stuff like that, or like when you're paying to get your message out there versus when you're like working with like a reporter or somebody to like get it out. And so, oftentimes like we do a lot of recruitment for storytellers. So we want people to like tell their abortion stories. And so we do a lot of paid media for that. And we do it very targeted in different states depending on like our needs. So we do, because that's like, it's better to do paid media for that versus like a pitch to a reporter, because that's not the goal really. So that's like an example of, the differences there. But it's really, it really just kind of depends on, like what your goals are, like who you're trying to reach. Because, and I mean, it kind of is similar with earned media too. Like, you're not going to pitch an out, like if you have a specific type of story that you're trying to say, you have to think about what outlet is going to do the best job to like get that story told to people who you want to tell it to. So they're similar in that way, but otherwise, I think that they're pretty different. And I know that a lot of people that I know don't really do a lot of overlap. Most people do one or the other, but others might know a little bit more about the paid side of things.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm one of those people that have to the overlap is because of the way our marketing team is structured. And like this is the peso model, right? So paid, earned, shared, and owned media. We handle all of those within our marketing team, and like similarly, paid is something that we use for more acquisition focused like initiatives. So if we're looking to build out our email list, if we're looking to fundraise, if we're looking to basically find people outside of our audience and bring them in to fold them into our organization. That's where we focus a lot of our paid media. I also think that it's vital too that to keep paid media to sort of that because earned media is obviously fantastic for those pitching, for those releases. But I would go, there's a lot of overlap, and I think that if you can and if any of you are interested, you should look into the peso model because it really does lay it down and lay it out if you are in a position where perhaps you do have to juggle all facets of it, and it gives you a good understanding of when and how and where to use each one. But yeah, just to reiterate, speaking from my experience, like it paid is very much for like our acquisition work, and then earned is where we are pitching those storytelling moments or those stories, whether it be national or local. And then shared would be like social things that we're putting on our platforms, and then owned is your video, your graphics, what are you creating, and so sometimes they can all be folded into like one, but I'm not going to get in there, but they really can. So that's a really great question, and I think you would really benefit from looking into that.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'd say it's such it's a tactical and resource-driven choice a lot of the time because paid and earned media can kind of deliver very similar results depending on what you want to do. It's really choice between it's a choice in what you can do. Paid costs money, so if you have a little bit of money and you really think you want to do TV, that's not going to work out. So it'd be a heck of a lot better to focus that small amount of money on, like what Amani is talking about, say fundraising, getting more money so you can do other things if you need to reach bigger audiences. I also think what Amani said at the end is very astute. If your shop is doing it well, all of these things are feeding into each other, and you're using your paid media and chopping that up into smaller pieces for shorter videos that you can use for earned on social. All of our editorial, for instance, like our own media, when we're making our blogs and doing video, almost none of it gets put up without at least some small budget behind it. We're fortunate in that we're a large national organization that has a marketing budget just in our shop where everything gets something behind it, either to members or potential members or whatnot. But yeah, definitely resource driven. But if you can, do use everything in multiple ways, because every asset that is either earned or paid or created is something that can drive performance on all of your other channels.
Nice. Yeah, this next question I'm going to ask, I always like to ask everyone, especially when they have way more experience than me. But if you go back to when you were a baby flack or a baby communicator, what's the one thing you wish you knew then that would have helped your trajectory to where you are now? Mine is being nice goes so much farther than you think. I killed a story last week based on just not being an asshole to a reporter. And so, I would just love to hear what people's advice to their former selves would be. Whoever wants to jump in.
I mean, being nice is so important. Like, when people are like mean, I'm just like, why though? Like, it's just like, it's so much easier and like long term. It just, that is really, really, I mean, when it comes to like getting stories placed, like getting jobs, like just like being a nice person is just, and paying it forward, I think that a lot of people a lot of people like also just forget, you know, what it was like to be like starting out. And so I think that, you know, when somebody like when I go like back to my grad school and I like talk to like the students there, like, and one of them wants me for coffee, just like being like, sure, like, because you know that at that time you wish that somebody did that for you. So just like thinking about that is really important. And then I think, you know, I've learned that throughout my career, and I've been doing comms for like about 10 years now, that, you know, I feel like I don't think that my instincts have gotten better. I just think that I've gotten like more vocal and like more comfortable at expressing, you know, what I think. And so just sort of like trusting your instincts, because you really know what you're talking about for the most part. And you just need to like, you know, have the courage, I guess, to like show up and like say it. And that can be hard. And that is something that does take time as you know, do this work longer. So that's what I would say.
Those are all so good. Those are all like so good. I definitely echo the mentorship piece, right? Like having a mentor is critical no matter where you are in your career. Being a mentor is even more important because you have to, you know, pay it forward, and you learn so much from everybody. And the you know, I have found that some of the best relationships and some of the most interesting connections that I've made in my career have literally been from grabbing that coffee or from keeping up with people, following them on Twitter, liking their tweets, whatever it may be. Just connecting with people on a level that's not always work oriented goes a long way. My big thing though is like straight up imposter syndrome never leaves you. I have it to this day, and I think you know, imposter syndrome is definitely something that affects everyone, and I think it affects people of color and women a lot more, especially when you need to speak up in meetings, or if you don't, you know, for I have literally sat on my hands and like closed my mouth because I felt like I didn't know what I was talking about. And then like it's reiterated by someone else, and I'm like, shoot, I should have just spoken up because I was literally thinking that 10 minutes ago, and like we could have like been so much further. And so it's hard, and there's no right way to build that up. But I think that if you can surround yourself with people who remind you of that, and if you can make friends or you have colleagues or whoever it may be that can remind you of that, it's super important, because your voice is critically important. And the moment that you realize that and you don't shy away from it, like your good ideas start flowing, change gets made. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that's like the number one thing for me is still trying to like be able to be confident in myself and my ideas. But I think every day becomes a little easier. So
yeah, such a good point. Yeah, imposter syndrome is still crippling for me as well. So John, did you have anything you want to add?
Oh, I think that's all super, you know, on point, and like send that elevator back down. Like when you have a success, lift the people who have helped you up. Nobody is ever going to have a big success or a big project that goes awesome without a team that's either working like alongside them or under them. If you're not lifting them up when you have that big success, you're not doing your job properly. And you know, to the be nice point, besides it just being the right thing to do. So just do the right thing for doing the right thing's sake. But if you need another reason, relationship building is very key, not just in communications, but in politics. So you know, like if you have to be self-interested about it, like do it for that reason, but hopefully do it for the right reason.
Yeah. We're almost, we've got about 20 minutes left. So if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to submit them. In the meantime, William had a question that made me laugh because we had a thing we called on the P campaign the box, which is you can't tweet about things that make you upset in the moment. And so I guess for all of you, since you all manage, how much of your job is not only just making sure that your message is consistent externally, but also managing to make sure people like me don't pop off on Twitter internally and kind of muddle the message that you're trying to put forward?
that's a good question, because I definitely fall victim to that exact same thing. And I've had to take like 12 steps back from my Twitter and be like, okay, like I'm just going to use this to be a ghost and see what people are saying, because I need to maybe calm down on there a little bit. But I think, you know, I love I like love the I try to like work with my team or my marketing team and empower them to become leaders in their space for what they know. I think it's really important that, and this kind of speaks to the imposter syndrome thing, but I really like building up my team to be able to like to do what they want to do on social, to speak their mind, to speak their truth, what they know, and in a constructive way. Sure, like that box thing you're speaking of, I would love more details on that because perhaps I need to to take some notes. But I think it's like, you know, there is like a larger, what is that saying? Like it's like if you don't have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. My grandma taught me that. I still go by it. And that's why drafts are fantastic. Stick them in your drafts. And I find it so fun to like go back there and scroll through my drafts and be like, I wish I could have put this out into the world, but that's for me. And I have like my little private Instagram that I put them on. But yeah, I think the drafts, keep them in there. But anything else, like I do empower people to really use their social platforms, especially now we're seeing people in this field like really, really grow their own personal careers and professional careers by networking on social. And listen, if that's something you like to do, go and do it. If it's something you don't like to do, that's also not the end of the world. Like you can definitely forge fantastic relationships in this field without being very online or whatever. But I don't know if I offered any solid advice, but yeah, the drafts, keep them there.
John, what about you?
Our team's really disciplined, especially on public messaging. So usually it'll be like internal political stuff, differences in opinion between departments on campaign, things like that. And I just like to make myself available so people can keep their relationships within the team really solid. And if they need to pop off about something, they can say whatever they want to me, judgment free. And we can decide together if the issue's as real as it seems in the moment. But yeah, it's usually not too much of an issue on Twitter or something like that.
Ianthe?
Yeah, I haven't seen it be too much of an issue yet. I definitely think that there's times, like I know internally, like will be a lot of frustration about things. Like for example, it took Biden forever to say the word abortion, and we were just like all like complain and want to like go off on Twitter about it when he had another statement that like wouldn't even say the word. But I think folks for the most part have sort of like reeled it in, and we know that there's other people who are going to do that for us. So we don't need to like put ourselves out there too much on some of that stuff because you have to like manage like, okay, we do want a good relationship with the Biden administration, but we also, and so like we will tell them that stuff like in private, like being like, he needs to be bolder on XYZ. Whereas like a lot of like the activists on Twitter will like go more boldly and say that stuff. So we haven't really had an issue on it yet that I've seen. And then, I mean, we always do worry about also just like people talking about Planned Parenthood's like history because Planned Parenthood has a very like racist history and stuff like that. And so like, when they're like when there's like internal stuff to like internal laundry to air, I think that people get nervous about that at the higher level, but I also am like, people aren't lying. So like, why are you? I think they're just kind of like, because when it comes to like art, like racial stuff, I feel like we need to just like let people speak their truth. And I feel like it just makes it worse when you try to censor people. So, and listen to what they're saying. So I feel like we've been we've let people say that sort of stuff and acknowledge it and all of that. I mean, when there is a point where we feel like they're like doing like a lot of harm to the org, then it can be a problem. But for the most part, I feel like from what I've seen, people are pretty disciplined, but I'm also relatively new. But yeah, that's been my experience so far, at least.
Yeah. Okay. And all of you have been pretty much touched on having to deal with surrogates and principals. So it'd be really helpful to walk through the process of what prepping them looks like. Is it just talking points? Do you do interview drills with them? What does that process look like for each of y'all? I mean, Amani, I'll kick it to you since I feel like you probably do this the most out of everyone here.
Yeah, it's funny because the process becomes redefined every time you do it. And that's just the reality. You learn things that work, you learn things that don't work. But where I'm at currently with it is the value, and we saw this, we see this and we've seen it, especially in the last year with COVID and everyone and everything digital. I can hear one second. Okay, I think I'm good. I hope so. But in any case, yeah, I have, as everyone in all campaigns and operations and causes and stuff move their messaging pretty much exclusively digital for some time, one of the biggest things that we saw was like, let's take the Democratic National Convention, right? Like that was the first time that they had pretty much everything virtually, and they really empowered people to create their own content and join the conversation, and for surrogates to also really be able to fold in by that by using fantastic toolkits. And so I think that with surrogate work, there's like two different there's areas, and there's like their social toolkit and like what they can do to promote the message on their own platform. So whether that be platform, digital, they're kind of shared and owned sort of part of it. And then there's the prep work that we were just speaking about. And as I actually think that there's a lot of good things that have come out of like having to shift digitally. You can hop on a Zoom and kind of do a quick like pitch. You can kind of you're able to really streamline a lot of this. It doesn't necessitate all of the stuff that happened in the past, or perhaps you'd have to fly to a different state with a camera crew and all of this stuff and then record them physically. And if you're doing video work, or perhaps like you'd have to fly to another state and then hold this large event, like you can work with surrogates now effectively online. And so if you're able to just carve out like an hour, hop on a Zoom, definitely load them up with a fantastic script. Make sure you get that to their team like 2 weeks before, so any edits are like good to go on that day. Load them up with a really, really thorough platforms toolkit, any graphics that are customized to that surrogate. You don't want to really give these general ones social copy that they can definitely meld. Also, one thing, that I think is hilarious is one thing that Republicans tend to kind of fail on is like they will literally send like one tweet and have everyone tweet it out. And then you can it's like 6 different like Republicans tweeting out the exact same thing. Don't do that. Very much tailor it, put that in that platform toolkit. And then, try to prep as much of that work as early as possible. All that to say, I think that there is a lot of accessibility that is now available due to the last year and what we've had to do. And so surrogate work has definitely become a easier process, but that does necessitate quite a bit of work before you actually like meet with the surrogate, because time is, of the utmost value. So as much as you could do beforehand, the better.
Yeah. Ianthe, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do a lot of prepping of our spokespeople. So typically the process is we will we'll figure out the details of the interview. We do a lot more prep when it's like a broadcast interview. When it's like a print, like on a phone call, we're usually on the call with them. So like if anything like happens, we can like jump in. But usually we'll write a brief, and in the brief we'll like start it with like 3 key things to say. So you'll figure out like what are the 3 messages you want to get across in this interview, and like some bullets in addition to that, like to kind of like expand on that. Whether that's like there's some stories that you want to share about, like for example in Texas, like what life is on the ground right now. If we're talking about a specific like Supreme Court oral arguments, we'll of course confer with our legal team about like what are the main takeaways that they had. I'll put that in the brief. So it's just really kind of figuring out like, okay, what do we want to say? What do we want to get out of this interview? What is our main message? And then in prep with the spokesperson, it depends. Like Imani said, it's like different each time. Like some spokespeople really just want to like sit and read the brief in silence while you're just sitting there and like ask you a question. Whereas some will want to do like the back and forth like with interviews and like ask you like and have you like play reporter and like critique their responses. But a lot of the times we'll just like work with them and say like, okay, like what is the first thing you want to say? Like what is your opening sentence going to be? And then working with them to like refine that, because media training 101 is that you don't have to answer the question, you just have to like say what you want to say. So like working with them on like what is that thing you want to say? But each like spokesperson is different. Some of them will come in with like their own thing and they have like everything ready and they take none of your advice, whereas some are like very good at actually like following what you said, and you see that interview and they like actually listen to what you said. And then, the other day we had an interview, and I didn't do prep for this one, but our president at Planned Parenthood, she was doing an interview with the president of Susan B. Anthony's List, which is like the anti-abortion org. And we were like, it was a lot of back and forth. I'm like, should she do this? Should she not? It was like a PBS NewsHour interview. And so they were like a great outlet, obviously. Yeah. And so it was a lot of us like determining if she should do it or not. And then like asking her like the really tough questions, the tough pivots, reminding her like don't be sarcastic, like things like, because like sometimes like depending on when you're talking to somebody who you think has no credibility, like you have to like remind to like coach your spokesperson that you have to like come off a certain way. So all those like little reminders can be helpful. But yeah, it really depends on the spokesperson. But I think having a brief, first of all, which will have like your main messages, but also like tricky Q&A, like things that they could be asked about that they may not know, that may not be even a part of the topic that they should be covering. But sometimes reporters like throw like left field questions to make sure that they have like answers, and also just like doing a quick sweep of like what just happened in the past hour. So if there's like a new story popping, that they have like at least like a couple lines that they can say on that, and if not, like a pivot that they can use to like pivot away from it.
Yeah. John, is there anything you want to throw in there?
So we usually deal, well, not we, as AFSCME, we deal with surrogates or spokespeople of all levels. So for instance, President Saunders, Lee Saunders, who's the president of AFSCME, is very comfortable with media interviews, has gone through, extensive training and years of it. So it's an easier process that I think reflects what Iante is talking about a lot more for President Saunders. For our field team, we insist on pretty much every local campaign that the people who are on the record are AFSCME members or potential members who are trying to organize. So that takes a lot of practice, from everything from practice sessions over Zoom or live in person if possible, to the briefing materials, and you have to do it multiple times. And more and more the less comfortable a spokesperson is, so that they can be comfortable in the moment. Media interviews, especially for people who haven't done them very often, are very stressful, and they will continue to become more stressed as the interview approaches and then is taking place. So everything that you can do to give them strategies to cope with that, even down to physical strategies to cope with that, like taking your hands and clasping them under camera if you're on Zoom, or like gripping the floor with your toes, things like draw blood away from your lungs, like the places that get tense, so they present well. It's super, super important, especially on TV and local TV, where they're looking for a 10-second clip, and you need to give them a good 10 seconds to pick from.
Yeah, that's super important, especially the soundbite part. So we're pretty much at the end here. We're just going to do one last question, which is for everyone. Just what's one piece of advice, something that you may not have mentioned yet on the panel, that you wanted to put out there for people that are interested in pursuing a career in communications? Oh, and also a way to get in contact with you for folks that have additional questions.
Sure. Okay, I'll start. I think I'll reiterate the point about like, don't be afraid that you are not qualified enough to apply. I think one thing that we psych ourselves out with a lot is we see job descriptions or job openings that are incredible, and then we psych ourselves out before we even hit send on our application. I don't, try to avoid doing that because sometimes doors will open that you didn't even know you had the key to. And oftentimes you have people in your circle that can help you either by hyping you up or that they know somebody there. Just don't halt yourself. Trust yourself and trust your passion and trust your everything in order to get into any job that you are passionate about. The second thing, and I can't be like remiss by not mentioning this, if you are looking for like a pathway into communications, the National Democratic Training Committee offers a bunch of free trainings on around and in communications. So whether that's like drafting a press release, to working with or networking with, fellow reporters, to how do you create a strategic plan, all of those lessons are free on our site. And we also have a staff academy program with a communications track that is about 10 weeks long, and will prepare you in that position, and then we'll match you to a communications job by the end of it. If you want to get in contact with me, Amani Zara is my name. You can find me on Twitter at Amani Zara, and also feel free to email me, which is amanizara with a K @gmail.com. But thank you. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you all for also being on this panel. You guys are awesome.
Thanks. Iante, do you want to go?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a piece of advice. So before I can start with my email address, because that I have that top of my head. So you can email me at ianthe.metzger@gmail.com, and I'm happy to like chat with anybody. But I mean, in terms of advice, and this is advice that I didn't even take myself, but if you are like remotely interested in like political work or political communications, I would suggest doing a campaign. I didn't do one and I regret it. And now I feel like I'm not like too old to do it, but I mean, I have a mortgage and I'm like not trying to like move across the country.
Fair.
But I would definitely recommend doing a campaign. I feel like you can learn from what I've seen that you can learn just learn so much so quickly. And it doesn't have to be like a presidential, it can be like a Senate, like a congressional race, like, like a AG race. Like there's just so much, you will learn so much and move up so quickly from doing that. So I would definitely recommend that. And then I would, just keep in mind how versatile comms is. I mean, you can like sometimes you need to like figure out like what like type of thing you're passionate about, whether that's like tech or like unions or music or whatever, and then you can do comms in that space. Maybe it's not about like figuring out like comms right away, but figuring out like what you want to do comms for. That can like determine like if you actually like it. So just think about that, and so I would start with like what you're passionate about first, then sort of like look for comms after, if that makes sense. So
yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of working on campaigns. I've probably done too many at this point, but here I am again. It was really helpful. Someone said in the chat earlier, how to transition from research to comms. A lot of my job is pitching research. So it's really helpful to not annoy our research director with annoying questions that are irrelevant, because I know exactly what to ask for, which is nice. Allows him to do his job more efficiently. And then it also makes it really easy for me to walk through with pitches with reporters, just down every bullet. And so being able to be in a position where I can marry those two skills has been really helpful for me to transition into comms. And so advice with that, I will echo Ianthe there. Definitely go out and work on a race. There are a lot of races hiring for comm staffers right now. It feels like there are no available people to hop on a campaign and do comms. So the bar is lower than you think, not in a sense of talent, but just in a sense of people don't feel like you have to have a huge background in comms to be able to not only enter a position, but be good at it as well. So that's my advice point. And I will have John close out here.
I'm going to pick some pieces from everybody, but please apply, even if you don't have like every listed skill set. If you have some or most of them, you probably qualify. And if you don't get the job, there might be other jobs that they have knowledge of or available either on their campaign or in their organization that can lead you to your ultimate goal. So don't be afraid of a little bit of a detour. So for instance, if you can go work in the research team is the best path to comms. It's like the one that's most common. Like you said, it is pitching research 90% of the time. And then please speak up. It's like just incredibly important that we have, frankly, more people who look like the rest of the panel than me in these positions, or else we're only talking to a small segment of the people we need to, and voters or people who we're trying to reach. So please get involved, stay involved, and just don't be afraid of taking risk. That's the one thing I wish I would have done when I was a little bit younger and before I had the mortgage as well, was take more risk. I've shut myself off from opportunities. I'm happy with my life right now, and I ended up in a place that I wanted to be, but there are experiences I know that I've missed out on that I regret. So do take risks.
And John, how can folks reach out to you?
Just J for John, NOONAN @afsme.org. And I do want to say I have two positions that we are hiring for, one based in Atlanta, one based in Pittsburgh. And if you'd like to hear more about those, afsme.org, or you can reach out to me and I'd love to talk to anyone about them.
Awesome. And I forgot to say mine earlier. I can be reached at Roderica on Twitter. I live there, unfortunately. And so please feel free to DM me. I love to talk to people about this because I did not have the confidence nor the network to reach out to when I was getting started. So I definitely like to make sure that I send that elevator back up or down, as John said. I want to thank all of our panelists, John, Ianthe, and Amani, for doing this, and for Gain for facilitating this, and for all of you for watching. So hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
you too.
Bye.